Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we're continuing the Tour del SoulSaint Dungeon Edition. Pretty much is where we're at. So basically, it was requested to me in the ideas channel of my Discord. If you're not in there, check the links below in the description. You can get access to my Discord where everybody's like communicating. Kind of basically, that's where the community vibes, rocks out at, and just has a good time, right? But in particular, we've already done the Iron Twins, 2 different teams I showed you guys, the 2 that I use currently, as well as the Potion Keep. Now, hindsight's 2020, and I was thinking about doing my Minotaur video in addition to the Potion Keep. I could have probably consolidated those 2 because this one's pretty simple and straightforward. But what I will do is I'll give you my Minotaur as well as my Ice Golem team, and then we'll continue from there. So, you guys can kind of see it a little bit pretty obviously. Now, I don't know if this is going to be like exactly the number, especially when you start dealing with champions that are getting leveled up and they start gaining some stats as they level up and, you know, hit certain ranks and whatnot. But overall, this team is definitely under, I would say under 30 seconds is probably easy to be realistic about. Definitely under a minute, though. So, with that being said, I use a single farmer, and then I have the rest of my slots filled up with champions that I do want to prog up and use for miscellaneous content. So think, you know, your teams for champions that you may recently acquire for PvP or other content like these dungeons, or just for Sin City, for example. So in today's example, I'm actually going to show you guys my main team. Sunwoo is my guy. That's the guy, my go-to for farming Minotaur, believe it or not, at stage 15. And the other 4 slots are going to be food. So as you can see here, I have Lord Chazar, I have Mashalid, I have Basilisk, +2 for the flex, as well as our Kanagashi. So these 4 slots don't really matter. It's more so just Sunwoo himself. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the team that I'm rocking out with and how he's basically built. I do have a preset for him just to kind of help speed up the first couple sets of the wave and leading into the boss fight, which is kind of important. And that's basically how it's going to go. Now, these stats are not as demanding, and I'm just going to go in and say this as a preface. He's not actually built for this particular content in mind. He's actually built for other content like PvP, as well as, more importantly, Hydra, which is where I primarily use him at the moment. So, he is running a pretty high speed at 294. You can go severely way lower than that. The main goal is that, 1, you can tank the hits, as well as you can do a decent amount of damage just to kind of get through the waves. That's really the main thing about it. So, like, these stats are very in-game-ish, for lack of better words. But I do have him at 294 speed. He is crit capped with a 315 crit damage at 6.8k attack, which are those are the big focuses for his damage output. In terms of defensive stats, 2.4 defense as well as 40k HP. I don't think these numbers are way like as demanding as you're probably going to expect. You could probably cut this all in half and you do fine. Here's what we're going to go with, though. I have round 1, he opens up with his A2. That typically one-shots whoever he's hitting, and the surplus damage, as you can obviously read in his kit, will pretty much splash damage and kill the rest of the wave. Round 2, I have him open up with his A3, which allows him to pretty much one-shot the wave there as well. And then round 3, I have him prioritize the A1, or the A2, excuse me, and the A2. So what should happen is he A1s one of the adds that are associated to the boss, then he A2s it, which does a lot of splash damage, and then from there, it's just, you know, rinse and repeating until he clears the boss. So we're going to do a quick run. I'm actually going to show you guys really quickly here. But basically, that's how it's going to go. He is built in a damage build designed for, like, high defensive champions. So you're going to see ignore percent sets like Savage, for example. And I think he has maybe, like, a broken set or speed, actually, just to help complement getting him a little bit faster. But like I said, none of these sets are, like, mandatory. The main thing is, like, whenever the boss does get his turn here, he's not going to one-shot your Sun Wukong. And Sun Wukong is, by nature, typically a pretty squishy champion. But if you look at the damage output he actually takes, it's not that bad. And he can take a couple hits, and then in addition to that, with the damage output he does, and company, that you really don't depend on them, but if they do a little bit extra damage, then by all means, you know, great. But the main thing is that Sun Wukong is able to do enough output to really kind of get a lot of the damage out there. I'm going to show you his build here real quickly just so you guys get an idea of it. I do have him in Savage, I do have him in Speed, and he also has an accessory for Slayer, which allows him to hit all the stats that we're looking for. So pretty much the name of the game is just getting crit capped, getting a decent amount of speed, and as much damage as possible. The HP and all that kind of comes in natively, believe it or not. You know, if you look at some of the pieces I'm rocking out, mostly damage. In this one, you get a little bit of HP percent. The resistance not so much important. You know, a little bit of accuracy, and, you know, you get some blanket defensive stats with, like, the primary stat of the helmet's always going to be HP. Shield's always going to be defense. And then, of course, laced throughout you got some flat defense. You got some accuracy, resistance. You know, like, basically, you don't really play with the mindset that you're going to be building defensively overall. The main goal is just to make sure you can pack a punch whenever you're doing your kit. And that's kind of how I have him designed. He is also fully awakened, which is a nice bonus, and I do have him use Crushing Rend. But I won't lie, it's not mandatory. It's just complementary to the damage you have. As long as you got the stats to kind of make sure you pack a punch whenever you're going through the waves, and as well as the boss fight, you want to get the ads down quickly, and you want to get the boss down as quickly as possible, because it is a little bit of a battle of attrition. You know, you just want like a damage-oriented type blessing. So some that you could use, besides Crushing Rend, if you're not at a 6-star level, you could use things like Lightning Cage, which deals damage as you generate orb stacks, and it does bonus damage equivalent to like enemy max HP in a sense. You could use Phantom Touch, which also is scalable off of attack, which is what Sun Wukong's primary stat is. And then pretty much that's kind of like the long and short of it. You could use Soul Reap if you're trying to get through the battle just a little bit faster. For me, because I'm using him in alignment with a lot of other areas of the game where there's like a lot of high defensive stats in play, think PvP, think Hydra at a Nightmare level, having the Crushing Rend allows me to ignore even more percentages of the defense, which makes me get one step closer towards that true damage. So that's my ideal stat lineup for him there. Masteries-wise, pretty much it is PvP tailored. I have a little bit of accuracy to kind of help complement being able to get some of the damage output out, or some of the strips if I'm using like his A3 to try to remove some buffs, or if I'm trying to sheep somebody with his A2. Having a little accuracy tree down there. Lore Steel, really good with variable sets. So like Slayer, where I'm getting that little bit extra crit rate or that little bit extra crit damage or attack. And then, of course, speed and all those other set bonuses that give you like some kind of stat base. It adds to that, so it's complementary, right? And then, of course, this is more so in line for just landing some of the debuffs and whatnot, just increasing that chance or whatever. And I think that was kind of like more of a throwaway. And then the rest of his build is kind of just more so basically damage oriented. So you're always going to be going against targets that are higher HP, because Sun Wukong by default isn't a high HP based champion, even when you have him fully awakened, fully faction guardian like my champion is. 40k is in that's very easy to hit as you progress in this game. Of course, getting crit capped and crit damage, we're trying to amplify his output, benefiting off the fact that he can stun targets. So like I said, it's very PvP centric. We do lean even heavier into ignore percent defense with Helm Smasher, which just complements being able to do more. You notice we're kind of following this trend of like ignore percent, and of course ignore percent. So that's pretty much the long and short of it. That is the Minotaur team that I use. I pretty much just bum rush the boss and try to eliminate him as quickly as possible using one of my, I guess, faster and stronger champions. So definitely doesn't hurt. But we're not done. We're going to actually continue with Ice Golem today. I do farm at stage 10 on hard, and this is one of the teams that I kind of recently made some alterations towards, and I'll give you some examples and some things we're going to clean up. If you're familiar with what we did on the Potion Keep team, we actually did do a concept which is called the Seer Clear team. It's one of the more faster teams that helps with wave clearing. So you know how like you have like a lot of bosses or a lot of dungeon teams like Dragon, for example, where there's at least 2 waves of enemies and then you have the boss itself. The Seer portion of this team, which is going to be Seer, Lydia, and of course a resetter, which in my case is Yumiko, they're designed to kind of help you pop and get through the waves really quickly so you can get to the boss and you can fight the boss. That's where the boss killers are going to come into play, and in this particular case, my shining star is going to be Artak. We do have Norog in this team slot, and I'll explain why as we go through the battle. But to be honest with you, outside of this one little spot right here where you see Aura, he's really kind of not there for anything else. So with that being said, I am going to show you guys a little bit of the build, and we're going to kind of rock it out. I have myself all kind of like prettied up and kind of designated and whatnot. But basically, the long and short of it is we have Lydia set up with decreased defense and weaken in her kit from her A2, which also provides buffs, which is strength and increased speed, which makes Seer, when she pops her Karma Burn, a lot more exponential, right? And that's kind of like how the waves are going to go. We're going to pretty much prioritize trying to get Karma Burn out and set up with Lydia for Lydia to enable Seer to pop, and then that's how we're going to clear the waves here. So Yumiko is also pretty decently fast. She's actually going to be at the top of the turn, so we make sure that we have her reset turned off for the first wave because all your cooldowns are available, right? On round 2, though, because you just recently used those to clear the first wave, round 2 and wave 2, you're going to need to reset them, and that's where Yumiko or someone of the likeness, think Kaimar or maybe Crixia, will come into play. And then, of course, in wave 3, we actually kind of turn everything off from the wave clear team, which is basically they've done their job. We just need Artak to take over along with his sustainability, which I'll show you his builds after we do a run. Norog, like I said before, he's pretty much there just to exist as an aura bot. He's really there just to give us a little bit more extra defense to kind of make the run a little bit more capable for Artak in battling the Ice Golem at the end, Tainted Crisis. So here we go. First wave is going to be Lydia. Throwaway turn for Yumiko. Lydia setting up, and throwaway turn for the rest of the team. Seer pops. Then we're going to go to wave 2, get the reset, rinse, repeat. We're going to basically just eliminate the wave, and we're just going to go ahead and knock it out. At this point, I have everybody else pretty much turned off for the most part, and it's really all attack, burns, and sustain. That is the name of the game at this point. So ideally, we actually do want all the rest of the team members to die, because the reason why is we're trying to be efficient with our time in addition to that. So them getting knocked out pretty early on at the beginning of the round 3 or wave 3 where the boss fight is at is actually ideal. Now, I will say that my Yumiko, for example, is designed to be pretty tanky by nature because of the PvP elements that I have her used in. But if you had like an extra Yumiko, well, hats off to you, then you could probably build her to be a lot less tankier and just make sure that she's able to achieve the necessary speeds to be able to reset your team. And then she gets this wave and she dies immediately. That's what you really want. Same thing with Lydia. Lydia is pretty much designed that I just want her to just do the wave clear portion of this team, and then I want her to just go away at that point. And that's what you're going to see here. At this point, it's pretty much the build for Artec that's just keeping himself going, self-sustained. Obviously, if you haven't already kind of picked it out, he's healing himself every turn, which means that regen is in play, or a regen-like set is in play. And we get the team pretty much clearing through roughly around like a minute and some change, depending on how RNG and how long it takes for the boss to kind of get rid of most of the team besides Artec. So allow me to show you something here. We're going to go ahead and kind of illustrate some of our team here. Pretty much you kind of get the short of it. I'm only going to show you the seer portion of it if you haven't seen it already in the previous video. I don't know if I actually showcased it or not, but I'll give you the quick stats. I do have her merciless. She's actually a pretty decent build. But the main focus you want is a decent amount of crit damage at an ideal range. It doesn't have to be over the top. Like literally most of my builds when it comes to seers like roughly around like 200 speeds. But ignore percent is the name of the game, right? We want her karma burn to do as much damage as possible. So ignore percent sets are ideal. And in this particular case, 6-piece merciless does the job. Now, I also have her in Crushing Rin because if you pay attention to how each wave is handled, her first hit is typically the karma burns. So we want her hit to do as much damage in that first initial pop, and that's the main focus of this, right? So having a 0% on that first hit, even at tier 5 or less, you still get the benefit from that, and it will ignore a portion of the enemy's defense based off of their level, and of course your blessing level. So it'll scale higher the more you get more out of it, the higher the blessing, and then obviously at level 6 you'll pretty much have every head do it then at that point. Her masteries are kind of very traditional. They're very simple to what you're looking for, since her karma burn scales off of crit damage and the buff count that you have versus or being applied against enemies that have debuffs like decreased defense and weaken, which is ideal. We use like flawless execution as like our main focus, and of course we pick other masteries that kind of help us get a little bit more output in that. Most of the enemies, once you start getting to certain points of the game, think like Dragon 20 normal or any of the normal difficulties at like maybe stage 16 to 20 or higher. At that point, majority of the times when you're dealing with like your builds and whatnot, majority of the enemies you go against are going to have higher HP than you. So like Heart of Glory is not bad. Options like you know, basically that enable you to get as much output as you can are kind of ideal. Getting the most output on the one hit that you're going to do with Seer anyways. Like basically you want that one pop. You're betting it all on that one hit so that it does the job, and you can kind of keep moving forward. So those are some key masteries you can kind of like bank off of and ideally get going. I think also, since you're not taking any damage, I was showing a Heart of Glory here, you're never going to be getting hit, so you're going to have full HP. So like basically you're just playing with the concept of how the team operates, right? And that's where these masteries are complementing that. You know, it's just adding more to the fire, so to speak. Lydia, pretty much the main thing you need for her in the most part is just a decent amount of speed. Pretty much ahead of Lydia, or ahead of Seer, excuse me, is the main thing that you need to have. And then of course an appropriate amount of accuracy so that you land your debuffs. Now I have her in Curse set because I use her in other areas of the game. Think Hydra, for example, where having Hex is ideal. But it doesn't also hurt either, because with Cursed, any damage that anyone else takes, a portion of that also gets splashed over to the person that has Hex. So if the Karma Burn, for hypothetical purposes, you land your decreased defense on 5 out of the 6 enemies in that wave, but the 6th one did get weakened and like the Hex, the splash over damage that would occur from Curse when you're doing your Karma Burn, it will do the job. It finishes, especially if you have a decent build like how we have ours here kind of decked out, for lack of better words. Now, the bread and butter of this team, though, at the boss fight is going to be Artec. Artec is designed to be one of many things. One, he needs to be a tank. He needs to live. 2, he needs to be able to apply his damage, which the main focus of this is going to be HP burns, is A3, which requires you to have to land it with accuracy. So that's another big focus point of it. But then also, as a part of the mechanics of the boss that you're going to be fighting against, Ice Golem and his minions, they have the opportunity to apply heal reduction. There's no point in putting regen or sustain sets on if you're going to be netting 0 heals from it, right? From heal reduction as a debuff. So resistance is actually kind of an important factor too. We have Righteous, which helps us with speed and resistance, and then the regen portion of it. So these are the sets that I'm currently using. It doesn't have to be Righteous. It could be speed. It could be other sets that give you stats depending on where your deficiency are or where you're trying to make up for some of your stat loss. But in realistic nature, when it comes to a lot of dungeon concepts, it's just stat checks, for lack of better words. So to give you context here, I'm going to go ahead and show you his overall build. We do have a little bit of speed built into the Ice Golem on the area bonus side, but for the most part, everything else is mostly just builds. Which you'll see from not only Faction Guardians, but the Blessing. We do have a 5-star Blessing on them, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But really, it's all about how well you can build up your champion. I tried to get, for the most part, when I'm dealing with stage 10, anywhere north of 250. The boss is pretty fast himself, kind of very close to that range. I think he's like 245, maybe even 250 himself. So anything around that or higher so that you can go at least 1 for 1 ahead of him. You don't want to be getting lapped by the boss because that typically means that you're going to take more hits, meaning that you're going to have more to have to re-heal up. And remember, sustain is the name of the game, right? But also, you need to be able to tank those hits, like I said before, so having high defense and high HP is also important. If you take a look, we are a little bit on the higher side, especially since our Great Hall has been kind of catching up and developing. Shout out to my Great Hall farmers over the weekends when we go really ham here. But anything over like 4K is a really solid metric for a lot of dungeon teams. In particular for this one, I do have it going a little bit higher than that. But also, in particular, anything north of like 80k to 90k HP is kind of where I started noticing my success was very, very prominent. Now, it's a little bit overkill because, like I said, we're way more developed. But the key notes here is that you have to hit HP, defense with a decent amount of speed to keep going. But it's not only that. You got to land those debuffs and you got to resist those debuffs, right? So we do have them at a pretty hefty amount. I want to say that the minimum you want to aim for when it comes to a resistance check is anywhere around 450 or higher. I believe if we take a look, and I'll pull this up here for just a moment. On Hell Hades' website, this is a page that I refer to quite often. It's called the Stages tool, where you can kind of look up information regarding the fight that you're going against. So if we're doing dungeons here, and I'm talking about Ice Golem on hard, let's take a look at what the stats requirements are going to be at stage 10. So the bosses, we're not really worried about our tech because that's what the Seer comp kind of takes care of. All we have to do is just make sure we're over 100 speed. Very easy to do. But when we get to the boss side, he's at 240 speed. Which means that anything over that means that we'll be going ahead of him. If we go even faster, then there's a possibility we may be able to lap him a little bit, right? But the big key things is that his resistance is 320, which if you want to land his debuffs at a 95% factor or higher, you need to be 345 or higher in terms of accuracy. But on the flip side, his accuracy is also 330, which means you want roughly 435 to hit, I believe, at least a 90% or higher. I scale it even higher because I want to avoid taking heal reduction at all costs. So the exponential growth in terms of hitting 520 is with the mindset that I'm pushing it to the absolute 3%. So if you're familiar in this game, there's a absolute 3% rule where no matter what, there's a chance, 3% chance, where you either are just going to miss a debuff or they're going to land a debuff. That is a randomizer mechanic in this game that exists for everyone, outside of the exceptions of Irresistible, and you'll see that in certain people's kit. Think about Ronda's A2, for example. But really, that's the name of the game there. Is just making sure we hit the accuracy requirements, making sure we hit the resistance requirements at a decent speed, and then it's just much tankiness as possible. And that was the aspiration behind this build. Now, with that being said, regen is mandatory. The Righteous is not. Anything you can get in terms of making up for some deficits, one of the last little bit, and I'll just show you my Great Hall so you can kind of get an idea, is that out of all my stats right now currently, everything is finished outside of resistance. So that Righteous set helps me not only placate my speed, but it gives a little bit of an extra nudge towards the resistance to make up for maybe that 30 or so that I'm missing, right? And then, of course, I also recommend that this is like the best crutch you can ever have in the game. I preach it to the moon drops and the sun shines, but basically, area bonuses are a great crutch for you to lean on, especially as you're progressing this account, to make up for any deficiency you have. One of the things I noticed is that my speeds could be a little bit better, right? So I kind of leaned in and kind of, whenever I had some spare medals that I was throwing around at the time, especially when I was developing this team, I wanted to make sure that I grabbed, maybe a couple extra speed points there because everything else was already kind of taxing on this build. Very, very demanding. Now, with that being said, I don't want to leave you guys with just my build. I want to leave some suggestions for you guys. In terms of defense as an aura, it doesn't have to be that. It can be HP or it could be resistance. You apply it to whatever your build is deficient in, and you can make up the difference. Use aura for that outlet, whether that's speed, resistance, HP, or defense, right? And there's plenty of champions that have those particular ones. Like, for example, Lord Chamfer for HP, 50% of your total or your base HP, because aura is applied to your base stats of your champion. That's a good jump, right? Or in this particular case, since we were using defense, I'm going to give you some viable options, alternatives. I mean, obviously, Stultus has a 30% there. I'm going to try to go above and beyond to the higher side of things. I believe it is Raglan, for example, who has a high aura. It's 33%. Obviously, we showed you one of the more higher-end ones with Norog, who has a 40%. I believe there might be some other ones, and I'm going to double-check here. But basically, find an aura that applies to whatever stat you're looking for. So this one's just Faction Curse, but it is one of the higher-side ones. So, but look, find an aura that kind of helps you give that stat deficiency you're having a little bit of issue and make up the difference for it. In addition to that, though, you can also use that slot where Norog is in for other metrics. When they made the changes to the stat bloat on blessings, I didn't really revise my team for a good bit. And there were some issues where, like, the boss was end up triggering his threshold hits, which are the dangerous part about fighting Artec. That's why you don't want to just use, like, bursty routes without having some kind of way to mitigate the damage. There are teams, and I'll just throw it out there, like G-Nut, using his any max speed hits are really, really good. But the problem is that you'll end up proccing multiple thresholds, which if you ain't killing those minions, he pretty much gets true damage on the enemy. If you pay attention here, this attack will ignore 50% of each enemy's defense for each alive ally. So his adds, there's 2 of them. If you take that times that by 50, that's 100%. So your defense means nothing if he's doing these threshold procs. And if you had decently built G-Nut, for example, who does 30% damage, well, from 100, 90, 80, 70, you're practically already there about to proc the second one. If you had somebody go before and they did that last little 10% prior to him, then he's gonna proc it pretty hard. So if you get him down to 90% and then G-Nut goes and does his A3, you're gonna hit 2 threshold procs, and that's very dangerous, right? And there's ways around it. I mean, think about Man-Eater, for example, keeping yourself unkillable with block debuffs, so that you can keep doing that without too much of an issue and you don't die. There are comps out there that exist on that, but one of my main focuses was I want to make sure that the battle of attrition for someone like Artec or another burner could be useful. And what's kind of funny is that we are in the middle of an event right now where there's like nothing but enhanced progressive events for a lot of burners. So actually someone who would be maybe perhaps an upgrade, and this is very debatable, would be someone like Drang, who his burn doesn't require accuracy, so that's one stat line you don't have to worry about. But you do lose the decreased attack, which could be a bit of an issue. That's something that helps out with the mitigative spot of it, right? So with that in mind, you can put in whatever champions you need. I actually used to use someone like Duchess, for example, as my lead champion. Helps out with the speed. But then her passive is also pretty nice, too, against AoEs, which is what Crisis does, right? And that's kind of what you want to focus on when it comes to this type of team comp, is that you just want to keep the team alive. And at the end for the boss, Artec as your team, Walking Tomb Drink can be your team. I will say this is something like a little bit of a caveat that I have used before in the past, and I could actually go back to it without too much of an issue, would be using a Blood Shield ring or a champion like Duchess who can spam a shield for your boss killer like Artec along with emergency heal. That's something else I also have currently equipped on him. It's actually pretty good. I can vouch for it. So like no matter what, he's getting a percentage of his heal back. Think of this this blessing, depending on what level you have it as at the very least 3%. That's the equivalent to like maybe an immortal set in terms of heal scaling, and then even more as you go along. I mean, at 15%, how much more different is that by having another regen set? Really, really good. But the conditional part about it has to be addressed. So think shielding from your duo partner that you may lace with this champion. Blood Shield could also help you out. Outside of that, though, pretty much the masteries are designed to kind of complement the aspect of what he's going against in this fight. Nothing but AoEs we talked about, so having like Blast Proof is really, really ideal. Resistance checks, we try to make sure we prioritize that, which is why we have Resistance as Unshakable as our tier 6. Along with Defiant, of course, we want to hit and land those debuffs, accuracy as a focus. Lore Steel also gives us a little bit more value from those set bonuses where we're getting extra stats like Righteous, for example. And then, of course, resetting the skill. But there's one extra caveat that I want to throw in there, which is Spirit Haste. So you remember how we were talking about like the speed? I wouldn't mind it being a little bit higher. We make up for that with the blessing, because at the end of the fight, when we're fighting against the boss, we do want our allies to die besides our main boss killer, which is Artec, right? So for each one of them that pass away and they're on the floor, they're taking a nap, you scale up with speed, and that's what helps you kind of pick up your engine. And next thing you know, from being 259, now you add that 24 on top of that, and that's a decent speed. Now you're talking about cooking, where you're actually cycling to your to his turn more often, and you're able to maybe net a couple extra heals, maybe reapply some burns, which helps you kind of get him through the finish line a little bit sooner. So that's kind of how this team is designed. You guys let me know. Is this something you'd be interested in building for yourself? I know it is a pretty big stat demand, and there's a lot of alternative options. This is just what I use currently, as requested. I hope you guys enjoyed this tour to SoulSaint so far. And with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as always remember, stay ascendant.